moving on. So science then continues this secularization trend that we see in politics. Now we're going to see it in the intellectual realm. So the scientific revolution will break down basic assumptions that the church holds. And those assumptions are about man being the center of the universe and man being created in the image of God. The first one, man being in the center of the universe, will break down, will be the first thing that will go. Related to this, man being in the center of the universe will be another linked belief that God interacts in this world. And the scientific revolution will fundamentally challenge God's involvement in the physical world. In other words, people even like Newton believed in miracles. But in the aftermath of the scientific revolution, the legacy is an emphasis on empirical evidence, on observation and collecting evidence, and therefore a secularization of thought, where people will begin to reject beliefs that don't have evidence to back them up. Now, Copernicus, Galileo, we can talk about that. Obviously, the church resists some of these breakthroughs, some of these discoveries. Galileo, for example, was persecuted for spreading Copernican ideas, and therefore he's put under house arrest by the Inquisition, which is this Catholic court, religious court. Blaise Pascal in his Pensies writes. It's Pensiesman's thoughts, and he's writing about how humans are just on this tiny planet now, no longer in the center of the universe, rotating around the sun, and there's all these other suns out there. And basically how small that makes him feel. And how, in Pensies he writes, how it's unimaginable that there is a God or that there's not one. And he's a fervent Catholic, a believing Catholic scientist mathematician who begins to attempt to reconcile faith and religion. Faith and science. Not all will attempt to reconcile them. Obviously, some will reject faith, religion. Skeptics will begin to question whether we can believe or know anything. And Bale is one of those skeptics who knows how the humans he encounters are quite gullible and therefore believe in all sorts of crazy things, such as, what a comet means, or other superstitious things like knocking on wood and things like this. We believe in all sorts of things that are very gullible, that do not have evidence to back it up. And so Bale, therefore, says that a reasonable person follows things that have evidence, and therefore we can't prove which branch of Christianity is right or wrong. And so Bale himself actually changes branches from Protestant to Catholic, back to a different Protestant, because he doesn't know. And so he advocates for religious toleration because ultimately we can't prove one is right. And so, therefore, we don't know. And so we shouldn't be persecuting people for this. Spinoza is a thinker who rejects the idea of an outside God. Spinoza argues that God is the things of this world and only the things of this world. And so, therefore, there's no God who's giving us revelation in the Old Testament, in the Torah. There's no God performing miracles. There's no God listening to your prayers or following your habits or rituals or acting like Santa Claus. So he's regarded by many as this, as this atheist. And he's kicked out of his Jewish synagogue in the Netherlands. not all are atheists. I mean, it's very rare, but Spinoza is sort of, and he's not, but he's sort of advocating an extreme view for the 17th century, before the Enlightenment. But Locke, too, argues in his work that Christianity is reasonable. It's a reasonable religion, it's a good religion, and we can't choose between its different branches, with the exception of Catholics, right? Catholicism, not reasonable, but all the other Protestant beliefs kind of are. Christianity's reasonable. So therefore we need to have religious toleration. Catholics, or the Calvinists, the Puritans shouldn't be fighting against the Anglicans. You know, this is a reasonable Christian belief, religious system that we should tolerate. Now, in the 18th century, during the Enlightenment, I think I was discussing this with Nick earlier, what we begin to see is a divide in religion between the elites that are increasingly hostile to religion and the masses that are not. And what happens is that we really see this head at the end of the 18th century this comes to a head at the end of the 18th century with the French Revolution, where the elites reject religion and seriously compromise and eventually ban Christianity, and the masses respond quite negatively to that, rallying against the revolution because they support the religion. So this 18th century, this era of enlightenment, it's important to note this gap between elite popular opinion that's being formulated during the Enlightenment, propagated by these writers, the philosophers, these critics, spread at salons and coffee houses, tea houses, and other pamphlets. And so it's important to understand the difference between them and their very secular outlook on the world that's informed by deism and that's informed by this notion of reason. And the masses. And the elites view the masses as fanatics, right? Often, you know, traditional religion is viewed as fanaticism because these people believe things that can't be proven and are not reasonable. Miracles. David Hume, for example, writes how, you know, miracles are not possible. Empirical evidence is the only thing that verifies truth. So the church in the Ancien regime is experiencing challenges amongst elites, but continues to maintain a major societal role right up to the French Revolution in France. An elite role as the first estate, guaranteed by the government. So the French Revolution, as we noted, then we see these two sides coming to a clash. The elites want to reduce the influence of religion, and they do with the civil constitution of the clergy, which in France puts the church under the leadership of the state. And later, during the radical phase, the cult of the supreme being and the temple of reason that replaced Jesus and this Christian God with reason or a supreme being, which is this deistic notion of a clockmaker God who's not interacting in this world, but is very reasonable because of how he created it. In the aftermath of the French Revolution, there is a dramatic religious revival, Romanticism. And a huge part of Romanticism is, you know, this religious, refocus. Many romantics are quite spiritual. Rousseau, for example, does not back any religion, but he does discuss the need for spirituality, and he hopes that people are spiritual creatures. He holds that, you know, children learn in the environment and experience God through the environment, and that people ultimately are not restrained by religion and its orders and edicts and practices, but in fact that there does exist a natural religion that's not deism, but is actually a spiritual force that exists in this world.